The letter arrived before she did. That was the thing nobody in Ashridge Crossing wanted to talk about afterward. That Gerald Holt had written the letter canceling the arrangement 3 full weeks before Evelyn Harper's train pulled into the station. 3 weeks. He had folded it, sealed it, and handed it to the station master with the instruction to give it to the woman coming from Ohio with the brown suitcase. Then he had ridden out of town with 2 saddlebags and a borrowed horse, leaving behind unpaid debts, a canceled deed, and a name that people would curse under their breath for the better part of a year. The station master, a slope-shouldered man named Purvis, had lost the letter. Not deliberately. He had tucked it beneath the counter beside a rusted tin of tobacco and a broken pocket watch, intending to set it somewhere more visible, and then he had forgotten about it entirely because his wife had gone into labor that same afternoon and his mind had been elsewhere ever since. The letter sat under that counter for 22 days while Evelyn Harper packed her one good dress, kissed her widowed mother goodbye on a Cincinnati train platform, and traveled 800 miles toward a life she believed was already waiting for her. She found out the truth the way people find out the worst things. Not gently, not with any preparation, but all at once, standing alone with nowhere to sit down. If you've ever believed in someone who didn't deserve it, if you've ever arrived somewhere and realized the welcome had already been taken back, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next. And drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train shed its passengers the way a dog shakes off water. Quick, indifferent, already thinking about the next destination. Evelyn was among the last to step down onto the platform, partly because she had been sitting near the rear of the car, and partly because she had spent the final 20 minutes of the journey pressing her forehead against the window glass and watching the mountains rise up on either side of the track like walls being built around her. She had never seen mountains that size before. In Cincinnati, the horizon was flat and readable. Here, it folded in on itself, and she couldn't quite figure out where to look. She carried one suitcase. Brown leather, the stitching coming loose at the bottom left corner where she had repaired it herself with a needle and thread the wrong shade of tan. Inside, 2 dresses, a change of underclothes, a pair of winter stockings, a small tin of tooth powder, a hairbrush with 3 missing teeth, and a folded photograph of her mother standing in front of the house on Elm Street. That was the full inventory of the life she had brought with her. The platform at Ashridge Crossing was not much to look at. A covered overhang ran the length of it, and beneath that overhang sat 2 wooden benches, a coal-burning stove that had gone cold, and a wall of peeling notices advertising everything from livestock auctions to the rates of a telegraph service. The mountains pressed in behind the town's roofline, and the afternoon light had gone thin and gray, the kind of light that makes everything look older than it is. Evelyn set her suitcase down. She straightened her coat. She looked up and down the platform the way a person does when they are expecting someone and have not yet allowed themselves to consider the possibility that the person might not come. Gerald Holt was not there. She waited. The other passengers dispersed, a family with 3 children who were immediately absorbed into a greeting party of relatives. 2 businessmen who shook hands with a 3rd man waiting near the station door. A young soldier who no one was meeting but who walked off with the confidence of someone who had planned exactly where he was going. The platform emptied in less than 10 minutes. The station master, Purvis, though she didn't yet know his name, came out to collect a crate from the freight car, noticed her standing alone, and went back inside without speaking. She stood there for 30 minutes before she went to knock on the station master's door. "I'm looking for Gerald Holt," she said when he appeared. "He was supposed to meet the afternoon train. Has he been by?" Purvis looked at her. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, but a cousin of it. "You'd be the woman from Ohio," he said. "Evelyn Harper." "Yes." He sucked air through his teeth. He was a man who had learned that there was no good way to deliver news like this, and who had therefore decided that slow delivery only made it worse. "Mr. Holt left town," he said. 3, maybe 4 weeks back. There was a letter. "I had a letter for you." He glanced back over his shoulder toward the interior of the station house. "I believe I may have. I'm going to need a moment to locate it." It took him 11 minutes to find the letter. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the station house while he searched, her suitcase at her feet, and she did not say a word. She had learned a long time ago that the kind of silence that precedes bad news does not benefit from being interrupted. The letter was exactly what she feared it was. 3 short paragraphs in Gerald Holt's cramped handwriting, informing her that he had reconsidered the arrangement, that he wished her no ill, and that he had enclosed $5 to cover any inconvenience. There was no $5. There was a small rectangle of lighter-colored paper where the bill had apparently once been clipped. She could see the ghost of it, the faint impression, but the money itself was gone. Whether Holt had removed it before sealing the envelope, or whether it had slipped out during the 22 days it spent under the counter beside the tobacco tin, she would never know. She read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket. "Is there a hotel?" she asked. Purvis named one. She asked how much it cost. He told her. She looked at her coin purse and did the math quickly in her head and understood that she had enough for 2 nights, possibly 3 if she didn't eat anything she hadn't brought with her on the train, which amounted to half a biscuit and an apple that was beginning to go soft. She thanked him and walked out. She got as far as the end of the platform before she stopped. She was not sure what stopped her exactly. It wasn't that she didn't know the way to the hotel. Purvis had given her basic directions. It was more that her legs had run out of willingness for a moment, the way a clock sometimes stutters before it resumes its ordinary keeping of time. She stood at the end of the platform with her suitcase at her feet and the gray mountains all around her and the sky fading toward the kind of dark that comes early in high country, and she thought about how many things she had been wrong about. She had been wrong about Gerald Holt. She had been wrong to believe that a man who wrote long letters full of scriptural reference and talk of building something lasting was necessarily a man who meant what he said. She had been wrong to spend the $7 she'd saved over 3 years on a train ticket when her mother had told her plainly that she didn't have to go anywhere, that there were worse things than staying in Cincinnati and being useful there. She had been wrong, probably, to believe that some distant horizon would turn out to be the place where she finally made sense. She did not cry. She had cried once, on the train somewhere past Kansas City, when it had suddenly occurred to her that she was genuinely afraid, not of the marriage itself, but of the wanting of it, of having pinned that much of herself to something so uncertain. She had cried then, quietly, with her face turned toward the window so the woman across the aisle wouldn't notice. She had no tears left now. What she had was a suitcase, a nearly empty coin purse, and the particular clarity of thought that tends to arrive once a person has hit the bottom of their options and simply has to start somewhere. She was standing like that, upright, absolutely still, staring at the middle distance, when she heard the voice. "Are you lost?" It came from somewhere below her eye line. She looked down. A child stood at the bottom of the platform steps. A girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, wearing a coat that was slightly too large for her and a hat that had been knocked sideways by the wind. She was looking up at Evelyn with the frank, uncomplicated interest that small children sometimes aim at adults who appear to be having trouble. "I'm not sure," Evelyn said, which was more honest than she intended. The girl considered this. "My papa says standing still isn't the same as being lost. He says you're only lost if you don't know what you want." Evelyn looked at this child for a long moment. "Your papa sounds very wise." "He's over there." The girl pointed toward a wagon hitched at the side of the road, running parallel to the station. A man sat on the wagon seat, broad-shouldered, dark-coated, watching. When Evelyn looked in his direction, he touched the brim of his hat but did not move. "What's wrong with the lady?" the girl called back toward the wagon. "Clara." The man's voice was low and carried easy across the distance. "That's not our business." "She looks sad." "People are allowed to be sad." Clara, that was the girl's name apparently, turned back to Evelyn with an expression that said she found her father's reasoning technically correct, but personally unsatisfying. "He's not mean," she said, apparently feeling this needed to be clarified. "He just doesn't know what to say to ladies." "Most men don't," Evelyn said. "Mama did," Clara said. Then, matter-of-factly, "She died. Fever, 2 winters ago." She said it the way children say hard things, without armor, without the particular protective distance that adults develop after they've been broken and healed a few times. Just a fact. A heavy one, but a fact. Evelyn crouched down until she was level with the girl's face. "I'm sorry," she said. "That's a hard thing." "Papa says it's supposed to get easier." Clara tilted her head. "Has it gotten easier for you?" Whatever happened? I just found out about it, Evelyn said. So, not yet. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she turned back toward the wagon. Papa, she called, can the sad lady eat supper with us? The silence that followed was long enough that Evelyn had time to straighten up, prepare a polite refusal, and feel something she hadn't expected to feel, which was a faint, involuntary hope that the man would say yes. Clara, he said again. She doesn't have anywhere to go. You can tell by the suitcase. Another silence. The man, her father, climbed down from the wagon and walked toward the platform. He moved the way men who work with their hands tend to move, with a deliberateness that didn't waste anything. He was taller than she'd estimated from the distance, with a dark beard that hadn't been trimmed in a while, and the kind of face that looked like it had been through weather and come out the other side knowing something. He stopped at the foot of the platform steps and looked at Evelyn with an expression that was not unfriendly, but that was very careful. Cole Brennan, he said. Evelyn Harper. You came in on the afternoon train. I did. He looked at her suitcase. He looked at her. She could see him constructing the outline of what had happened. The suitcase, the empty platform, the woman standing alone. And she felt the small, familiar shame of being a situation that strangers had to figure out. She lifted her chin slightly, not defiantly, just to make it clear she was still in possession of herself. I'm not asking for charity, she said. I'll find the hotel. Hotel's fine, he said. But it's nearly dark and supper's ready at my place in about an hour. He glanced at Clara, who was watching him with an expression of profound concentration, the way children watch adults when they are hoping very much for a particular answer. He looked back at Evelyn. One meal, if you want it. It was not the warmest invitation she had ever received, but it was the only one she had. Thank you, she said. One meal. The Brennan Ranch was 4 miles from town, along a road that the wagon seemed to know better than Cole Brennan did, because he barely guided the horse at all, and they arrived nonetheless. The house was stone on the bottom and timber on the top. Not large, not new, with a porch that ran the length of the front and a barn that looked sturdier than the house. Someone had planted a kitchen garden on the south side, but it had gone straggly and unattended, the last of the autumn growth gone brittle and brown. Clara sat between Evelyn and her father on the wagon seat, and she talked for most of the 4 miles. She told Evelyn about the ranch, the horses by name, the number of cattle, the fact that the creek at the back of the property flooded every spring, and her father always swore about it, and then never fixed the drainage like he said he would. She told her about the school in town, which she attended 3 days a week, and the teacher, who was young and homesick and cried sometimes when she thought no one was looking. She asked Evelyn what Cincinnati was like, whether it had mountains, whether the women there wore the same kind of hats, and whether Evelyn knew how to braid hair because her father tried, but he was not good at it. Cole Brennan said almost nothing, but twice Evelyn caught him listening to something Clara said with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, more like the memory of one. Supper was a pot of beef stew that had clearly been started before they left for town, kept warm on the back of the stove. Cole ladled it into bowls without ceremony and set bread on the table, and that was the whole of it. Evelyn ate with the focused attention of someone who hadn't had a proper meal since the previous evening, and if Cole noticed, he didn't remark on it. You were supposed to marry someone, Clara said halfway through the meal. Clara. Cole set down his spoon. She said she just found out about something hard, and she came on the train with a suitcase. That means she came to stay somewhere. The girl looked at Evelyn with calm, relentless logic. Did the man not come? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. No, she said. He didn't come. Did he know you were coming? He did. Clara absorbed this. That's rude, she said finally, with the complete moral conviction of a 7-year-old. That's very rude. It is, Evelyn agreed. Cole picked up his spoon again. He didn't say anything, but something in the set of his jaw suggested he agreed with his daughter, and was choosing silence over saying something he'd regret in front of her. After supper, Clara insisted on showing Evelyn the horses. Cole stood in the barn doorway while his daughter walked the woman from Ohio down the row of stalls, naming each animal, explaining their personalities and their histories. Evelyn listened with genuine attention and asked good questions. Which horses were difficult? Which one was the oldest? Whether the gray mare in the last stall was in foal or just wide. Cole heard her ask that question and turned his head slightly, because it was not the question a woman from the city would typically think to ask. "She's in foal," he said. "Due in the spring." Evelyn nodded. "She looks well kept." "She is." They looked at each other across the barn, and there was a moment, brief, unremarkable on the surface, where two people who had each recently decided they were through expecting things from other people recognized something in each other and didn't speak of it. "I should find the hotel tonight," Evelyn said. "It's late to go back. I can manage." He looked at her steadily. "There's a guest room," he said. "It's not much. Clara's had it as a playroom for a while, so you'd have to move some things. But it's a bed." "I told you I'm not looking for charity." "You told me that, and I told you there's a room." He turned and walked back toward the house. "Suit yourself." She stayed. She intended to leave the next morning. She woke early, before Clara, before Cole, and she lay in the narrow guest room bed surrounded by the girls' displaced drawings and a collection of smooth creek stones arranged along the windowsill, and she made a clear and sensible plan. She would walk to town. She would spend one more night at the hotel. She would write to her mother, something she had been postponing because she couldn't yet face the wording of it, and she would ask whether enough of her previous life remained to go back to. Then she went downstairs and found that the stove had gone cold overnight, and there was nothing for breakfast. She built the fire herself. She had grown up watching her mother do it, and the memory lived in her hands rather than her mind. How to set the kindling, how much paper, how long to hold the draft open before letting it draw. By the time Cole came downstairs, he found coffee made and cornmeal mush on the stove, and Evelyn sitting at the kitchen table sorting through a basket of laundry with the same methodical attention she had given everything since she arrived. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I was awake," she said. He poured himself coffee without further comment. They sat at the table in a silence that was not, she noticed, particularly uncomfortable. That was how 2 days became 3, and 3 became a week. And the week became 10 days before either of them thought very hard about what that meant. Evelyn cooked and mended and cleaned without being asked, not because she felt she owed it, but because she was built for use and the house needed using. Cole's home had been running on the bare minimum since his wife died. Functional, survivable, but stripped of anything that wasn't strictly necessary. Small things had been let go. A curtain that had torn and not been replaced. A shelf that had worked loose from the wall and been leaned back against it, instead of properly remounted. A collection of Clara's winter clothes that had been outgrown but not sorted through. Evelyn did not do these things all at once, and she did not make a production of doing them. She simply did what needed doing, the way a person does when they have found a situation that matches the size of their capabilities. Clara followed her everywhere, not in a needy way, but in the way of a child who has found something interesting and is trying to understand it. She asked questions constantly, about Ohio, about the train journey, about whether Evelyn could teach her to embroider because she had seen a pattern in the dry goods store that she liked, about what Cincinnati smelled like, and whether it was different from here. Evelyn answered every question with the same level patience. She was not naturally soft. She had an edge to her, a directness that had occasionally been described as unwomanly back home. But with Clara she was careful, the way you are careful with something you recognize as fragile without looking at. On the 8th day, she repaired the shelf. Cole came in from the barn to find her on a stool with a hammer and 2 wood screws, re-anchoring the bracket to the wall. He stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. "I was going to do that," he said. "When?" she asked. A pause. "Fair enough," he said, and went back outside. That evening, after Clara was asleep, they sat on the porch in the particular quiet that comes when the day's work is over, and there's nothing immediately demanding. The stars were extravagant up here, a density she had not anticipated, the sky so clear and cold, it looked like something that had been cleaned. "I'll start looking for work in town," Evelyn said. "Properly. I shouldn't stay much longer without contributing something real." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You've been contributing," he said. "That's not, paid work. Something I can live on." "There's not much," he said. "Mrs. Alderman at the laundry, maybe." "Holt," he stopped. Then, "Gerald Holt's cousin runs the dry goods store. She's decent enough. She might know of something." The name landed between them. Gerald Holt. the man who hadn't come. He left debts, Cole said carefully. People know he left. Words traveled. Evelyn looked at the stars. What kind of word? The kind that fills in where the facts run out. He said it without inflection, just as information. Some people are saying you must have done something to make him change his mind, or that there was something wrong about the arrangement from the start. He paused. It's not what I think. I'm just telling you what's being said. She was quiet. She had expected this, or something like it. The empty platform was a public fact. The story that grew around a public fact was always shaped by whoever got to it first, and Gerald Holt had had a 3-week head start. What do you think? She said. Cole considered the question. I think you came a long way in good faith. I think whatever he told himself about why he left, it wasn't about you. He picked a splinter from the porch railing without looking at her. I think people sometimes do things that have nothing to do with the person they do them to, and then the other person spends a long time wondering what they did wrong. Evelyn turned her head and looked at him. It was not what she had expected him to say. Your wife, she said carefully. Was it sudden? The fever? 4 days, he said. She was fine on a Monday. She was gone by Friday. I'm sorry. He nodded. He didn't say anything further, but his hand had stopped moving on the railing and he was looking at something she couldn't see. Somewhere past the barn, past the dark outline of the mountains, back toward a Monday that had been ordinary enough to be taken completely for granted. They sat like that for a while. Two people who had each had the floor pulled out from under them, sitting in the dark. The trouble arrived, as trouble often does, on the back of something that looked like ordinary news. It was Clara who brought it home. She came in from school on a Wednesday with a look on her face that was trying very hard to be neutral, which was how Evelyn had come to recognize that something had actually happened. Gemma Alcott said something, Clara announced, sitting down at the kitchen table with the forced casualness of someone reporting a disaster. Evelyn was rolling dough. She kept rolling. What did Gemma Alcott say? She said her mother said the woman staying at our ranch, Clara faltered. She said some things. Bad things. What kind of bad things? Clara looked at the table. She said you were the kind of woman who follows men around and pretends to be a wife when you're not. Evelyn's hands went still on the dough. She breathed once, then she continued rolling. What did you say? She asked. I told her that was a lie. Good. Then I pushed her. Clara's voice had gone very small. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have. But she said it like everyone already knew it was true. Evelyn set down the rolling pin. She came around the table and crouched in front of Clara, the same way she had crouched on the station platform, at eye level, direct. Clara's face was doing several things at once, defensive, guilty, frightened, and underneath all of that, the thing that was hardest to look at, which was the naked protectiveness of a child who has decided to fight on behalf of someone she has not yet figured out how to protect more carefully. Thank you, Evelyn said, for what you said, not the pushing. She was wrong. She probably is wrong. But more importantly, Evelyn paused, choosing words with care. You don't need to fight my battles. That's not your job. Whose job is it? A fair question. Evelyn stood up. She didn't have a good answer for it. Cole heard about it that evening. He didn't hear it from Evelyn. She had not mentioned it. But from a man in town who had apparently felt it was his civic duty to inform the widowed rancher that his house guest was the subject of some pointed conversation at the general store. Cole came home later than usual, and when he came in, he had the particular tension in his shoulders of a man who is working out how to say something. Evelyn was at the stove. You should have told me, he said. It's gossip, she said. It'll pass. Maybe. He sat down at the table. I was quiet for a moment. Holt's been seen. Someone said he passed through Delacroix, 2 counties east. He looked at her. He's not as far gone as he let on. Something cold moved through Evelyn that had nothing to do with the temperature. Why would he come back, she said. I don't know, Cole said. That's what worries me. She turned back to the stove. Her hands were steady. The thing about reaching the bottom of your options is that once you've been there, the next crisis is less surprising. She had learned, on the platform, what it felt like to discover that the ground beneath you was not ground at all. She had learned to keep her feet under her anyway. What she had not yet learned, what she could not have known yet, Standing at the stove in Cole Brennan's kitchen on a Wednesday evening with the smell of supper in the air and Clara doing her schoolwork at the table and the mountains going dark outside the window, was that Gerald Holt was not coming back to apologize. He was coming back to make sure no one would believe her. And he was counting on the fact that nobody in Ashridge Crossing knew her well enough yet to know the difference between a woman who had been wronged and a woman who had done the wronging. He was going to be wrong about that. But it was going to take a while before he found it out. And in the meanwhile, a great deal was going to have to be endured. Gerald Holt rode back into Ashridge Crossing on a Thursday morning, which was market day, which meant the main street was as full as it ever got, and there were enough people standing around with nothing urgent to do that his arrival became a piece of public theater before he'd even dismounted. He looked different than people remembered, thinner through the face, with a new coat that was too good for the weather, and a hat pulled low in the way of a man who is making a calculation about how visible he wants to be, while simultaneously being unable to resist making an entrance. He tied his horse in front of the general store and stood for a moment on the boardwalk, looking up and down the street with the particular expression of a man returning to a place he has decided, in advance, to treat as if nothing happened. 3 people recognized him in the first 2 minutes. Within 10, the information had traveled the length of the street and back. Evelyn was in the dry goods store when Martha Alderman, who ran the laundry 2 doors down and had appointed herself the town's primary information distribution system, came through the door with the bright, controlled urgency of someone delivering news they have been looking forward to delivering. "Gerald Holt is back," she announced to the room at large. Evelyn was examining a bolt of brown wool. She did not put it down. She turned it slightly to check the weave in better light and said, without particular inflection, "Is he?" Martha looked slightly disappointed. She had expected more from this. "He's on the main street," she said, bold as anything. "People generally are," Evelyn said, "when they've decided ahead of time that they haven't done anything wrong." She set the bolt back on the shelf. She had come to town with a short list: thread, a replacement button for one of Clara's winter coats, salt pork if the price was decent, and she intended to complete it. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her face was what it was. Whatever she was feeling was happening somewhere below the surface, where it had no business affecting the price of salt pork. She found out what Holt was actually saying before she'd finished the list. It came to her in pieces, the way bad news travels in small towns. A fragment from the woman at the dry goods counter, a fuller version from the man loading supplies into a wagon outside, the complete and terrible shape of it by the time she was walking back toward where she'd left Cole's wagon at the livery. Gerald Holt, it seemed, had not returned to confess anything. He had returned to explain. His explanation, as best Evelyn could piece it together from second-hand accounts, went something like this. He had written to the woman in Ohio and broken off the arrangement cleanly and in good time. He had included money to cover her travel costs back home. When he'd returned to Ashridge Crossing, only briefly, he was careful to say, just to settle some remaining business, he had learned that the woman was still in town, living out at the Brennan Ranch. And what truly troubled him, he said, was that when he had written that letter, he had included $40. He had counted it himself and tucked it into the envelope. And now the letter had apparently arrived without that money. He wasn't saying anything certain. He was simply noting the fact. $40. Gone. Evelyn stood beside Cole's wagon and let the full weight of this settle on her. $40. A number large enough to be serious, small enough to be plausible. And the letter had genuinely arrived without money in it. She had told Cole that, in passing, one evening. She hadn't thought about who else might know. She drove back to the ranch alone. Cole was out on the eastern pasture mending fence and wasn't expected until late afternoon. Clara was still at school. The house was empty and quiet, and Evelyn sat at the kitchen table for a long time without doing anything useful, which was unusual enough for her that the stillness itself felt like a symptom. She was not afraid exactly. She was trying to accurately assess what she was up against, and the honest answer was that it was worse than she'd first calculated. A man returning to accuse the woman he had abandoned was a piece of behavior so nakedly self-serving that most sensible people would see through it. But sensible people, in Evelyn's experience, tended to be in the minority when a story had the right shape, and Gerald Holt had given this story a very good shape. A missing $40. A woman already being discussed in less than flattering terms. A widow's home she had inserted herself into with no invitation that anyone in town could verify. Clara came in from school before Cole returned. She dropped her things by the door and came directly to the kitchen, read Evelyn's face with the quick accuracy of a child who has grown up reading adult moods for clues about what kind of afternoon it was going to be, and sat down at the table without being asked. "Something happened," she said. "Yes." "Gerald Holt?" Evelyn looked at her. "Who told you?" "Gemma Alcott." A pause. She said things. About money. Clara pressed her lips together. "I didn't push her this time." "Good." "I wanted to." "I know." They sat together at the kitchen table, the woman and the girl, in the kind of silence that isn't empty but that neither of them quite knew how to fill. Outside, the afternoon light was going gold, and the wind had picked up the way it always did before sunset, carrying the smell of cold earth and dead grass. It was the kind of day that made you feel how far you were from any other place. "Is it true?" Clara asked finally. "About the money?" "No," Evelyn said. "It's not true." Clara nodded. That appeared to be sufficient. She got up, took an apple from the bowl on the counter, sat back down, and began her schoolwork with the focused calm of someone who has made a decision and moved on from it. Evelyn watched her for a moment. Then she got up and started supper. Cole came home as the light was failing, and he knew before he was off the horse. She could tell by the way he unsaddled with slightly more deliberateness than usual, the way a man moves when he is holding something in and doesn't want to spill it by going too fast. He came in, washed his hands, sat down at the table, and waited until Clara had finished eating and been sent off to do her evening reading before he spoke. "I heard," he said. "Most of the town has, I imagine." "What do you want to do?" She looked at him across the table. It struck her, not for the first time, but more sharply tonight, that this was a man who asked what she wanted to do rather than telling her what was going to happen. She was not sure she had met many men who did that. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I need to think." "He's saying $40. I know what he's saying." Purvis found the envelope. "He's willing to say the letter came through his office, and there was a period of time he can't account for." Cole said it carefully, like a man laying down cards. "That's not nothing. It gives Holt a way to say the money might have gone missing in the station. Or it gives him a way to say it went missing when I picked up the letter." A pause. "Yes." She pressed her thumb against a rough spot on the edge of the table. "Did you know him before all this?" "Not well. He bought some land east of town, or said he did. I never saw a deed. He talked a lot about what he was going to build." Cole turned his coffee cup in a slow circle. "The kind of man who uses the future tense like a currency. Talks about what's coming instead of showing you what's here." Evelyn was quiet. She was thinking about the letters Gerald Holt had written her. 6 of them over 4 months, each one full of the future tense. The home he was going to build, the partnership they were going to have, the life taking shape just ahead, always just ahead, perpetually arriving without ever quite arriving. She had read those letters so many times she had memorized pieces of them, the particular cadences, and now those cadences felt like a con man's patter, like the script of someone who had learned the right words without any of the accompanying intention. "He's a liar," she said. Not with heat, just as a statement of fact. "Yes," Cole said. "But he's a liar with a story that's got enough gaps in it to look like the truth." She looked at him. "You believe me?" "I do." "Why?" He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Because you've been here 10 days and you've never taken anything that wasn't offered. And because a woman who steals $40 doesn't stay in the same town." He paused. "And because I know what lying looks like, and you don't look like it." It was a plain answer. It wasn't embellished, and it wasn't romantic, and it sat across from her like something solid, like that shelf she had re-anchored to the wall. Not beautiful, just fixed. "Thank you," she said. They did the dishes without discussion, the way people do when they've shared enough meals together that the division of tasks has organized itself into habit. Cole washed, and Evelyn dried, and neither of them spoke, and the silence was not comfortable exactly, but it was shared, which was its own kind of thing. The following morning she went back to town. Alone, without telling Cole where she was going, which she knew he wouldn't like, but which she needed to do. She needed to see for herself what the shape of things was. What she found was a town in the particular state of social suspension that small communities enter when something interesting and potentially scandalous has just happened, and everyone is waiting to see which way it's going to fall. People she had begun to recognize from her previous visits. The woman at the dry goods counter, the man who ran the feed store, the elderly barber who always seemed to be sweeping his stoop, looked at her with the slightly elongated attention of people who are watching a situation develop. Gerald Holt was in the saloon. She did not go to the saloon, but she went to the sheriff's office, which occupied a low building between the barber shop and the land office, and she knocked on the door and went in. Sheriff Dale Cutter was a man in his late 50s who wore the expression of someone who had seen the full range of what people were capable of and had made a private decision to reserve judgment until the evidence was in. He was not unkind. He was also, Evelyn could see immediately, in a position he didn't particularly enjoy, caught between a man making an accusation and a woman he had no personal knowledge of. "Miss Harper," he said, "I was thinking I'd hear from you." "Then you've heard the story Holt is telling." "I've heard several versions of it." He folded his hands on the desk. "I want to be straightforward with you. He hasn't formally filed anything. He's talking, but talking isn't the same as filing." "What happens if he files?" Cutter studied her. "Then I investigate." "That means asking questions of you and of him and of anyone else who might know something. It means looking at the envelope and the letter and talking to Purvis." He paused. "Right now I'm just saying he hasn't filed." "Why not?" A longer pause. "That's a good question." Evelyn thought about it on the walk back to the wagon. If Holt had $40 and a grievance, the natural move was to formalize the accusation. The fact that he hadn't yet suggested something, either that he didn't have confidence in the story holding up under examination, or that he wanted something else from the situation before he went official with it. She was still turning this over when she rounded the corner of the land office and nearly walked directly into Gerald Holt. He was coming out of the office door as she was passing it. They were not more than 3 feet apart. He stopped. She stopped. For a moment they simply looked at each other, and Evelyn used those seconds to take an inventory of him that was as fast and thorough as she could make it. He was exactly as his letters had presented him. Or rather, he was the physical form of his letters, which was a slightly different thing. Good-looking in a surface way, with the kind of face that photographed well, the kind of ease that read as confidence until you looked closely enough to see it was performance. He was surprised to see her, and the surprise had knocked loose his prepared expression for a fraction of a second, and what was underneath it was not quite guilt, but something in the neighborhood, a momentary reckoning with the fact that she was more composed than he had accounted for. He recovered quickly. "Evelyn," he said, as if they were old acquaintances. "Mr. Holt, I hope you're—" He started a sentence and didn't finish it, apparently realizing there was no way to complete it that didn't sound absurd. He tried again. "I want you to know I never intended for any of this to be—" "I found your letter," she said, "without the $40. He spread his hand slightly. "I can't explain what happened to it." "No," she said. "I don't imagine you can." She walked past him. She did not look back. Her heart was hitting hard against her ribs, but she held her stride perfectly even, her back straight, her face forward, because she understood that this exact moment, this specific patch of boardwalk with whatever small audience had positioned itself to observe, was the kind of moment that got reported on and repeated, and the version that traveled would be the version people had seen with their own eyes. She heard him say, behind her, "I only want what's right." She kept walking. The problem, as she explained it to Cole that evening, was not that people thought she was guilty. It was that enough of them were uncertain, and uncertainty in a town this small was almost as corrosive as certainty. The people who liked her, who had seen her in the dry goods store, or watched her with Clara, or simply observed that she carried herself with a steadiness they found credible, were not loud. The people enjoying the story were louder. That was always the way. Cole listened without interrupting. He was doing what he often did when something was bothering him, sitting at the table with his hands flat on the surface, as if he were steadying it. "I've been thinking," he said, when she'd finished, "about the land office." "What about it?" "Holt was in there today. That's why he came back. Not just to spread a story about you. There's land business. something he started before he left. Cole looked at her. Man like that doesn't come back for a woman he jilted. He comes back for money. The woman is just cover. Noise. Evelyn felt something click into place. What land? That's what I'd like to know. He found out 2 days later through the methodical, quiet process of asking the right questions of the right people. The feed store owner who was also on the town council, the old surveyor who had been in the territory before Ashridge Crossing was officially platted, and the clerk at the land office who was young and hadn't yet learned to be strategic about what he mentioned in passing. The answer was that Gerald Holt had filed a claim on a parcel of land east of town 14 months ago, before the mail-order correspondence had even begun, and that claim had a problem with it, a problem in the original survey documents that could potentially invalidate the whole thing. The resolution of that problem required either a corrected survey or a witness statement confirming the original boundaries, and the man who had originally surveyed the land, an old-timer named Ferris, who operated out of the telegraph office, had apparently indicated he might have records that complicated Holt's version of the boundaries. He's worried about his land, Cole said. If the claim goes sideways, he's got nothing. Coming back to cause trouble about you might be his way of making himself look like the wronged party before someone else gets to tell the story. Evelyn absorbed this. Does Ferris have the records? He says he might, and Holt knows that. He does now. They were sitting on the porch again, as they did most evenings when the weather permitted. Not by arrangement, just by habit, the way a lot of things between them had organized themselves into habit without either of them quite deciding to. The mountains were purple-black against a sky that still held a stripe of red at the horizon. He's not going to stop, Evelyn said. Not if there's land money involved. The story about the $40, he'll push it harder before he backs off. I know. So what do we do? Cole was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the dry grass on the hillside, and the barn creaked once, and the mare in the last stall shifted her weight. We find out what Ferris actually has, Cole said, and we make sure the right people know what's in those records before Holt gets to Ferris first. It sounded simple. It was not going to be simple. Evelyn had lived enough life to understand the difference between a plan and a plan working, and she knew that between here and any version of this resolving cleanly were a lot of days in which the town of Ashridge Crossing was going to look at her with doubt in its eyes, and she was going to have to keep moving under that weight. But she had been moving under weight for a while now. She had gotten reasonably good at it. The morning things tipped from uncomfortable to actively dangerous started with Clara. The girl had said nothing about school for 3 days running. Not the teacher, not Gemma Alcott, not any of the ordinary daily reporting that she usually couldn't contain. Evelyn noticed the silence the way she noticed everything, without drawing attention to the noticing, and she waited to see if Clara would bring it herself. She didn't. So on Thursday morning, as Clara was getting her things together for school, Evelyn said, "What's happening with Gemma Alcott?" Clara's hands went still on her lunch pail. "Nothing," she said. "Clara." A long pause. "She told everyone at school that the lady at our ranch stole money from a good man who was just trying to help her." Clara said it with the flatness of someone reciting something they have committed to memory. "She said her mother says my papa is making a mistake keeping you here, and that people are going to start wondering about him too." Evelyn sat down. "And the other children?" "Some of them believe her." Clara finally looked up. "Tommy Brewer said his dad said you should have to leave town. He said it right at me, right at my face." Evelyn put her hands on the table. She thought about Gerald Holt on the boardwalk, perfectly composed, saying he only wanted what was right. She thought about the space between what a person deserves and what they get, which in her experience was not always a small space. "Look at me," she said. Clara did. "I didn't take any money, not 1 cent of his." "I know that. And when this is over, and it will be over, you are going to remember that you stood on the right side of it. That's not nothing. That's something you get to keep." Clara stared at her. Then she picked up her lunch pail. "I'm going to be late," she said. But at the door she stopped. "Evelyn," she said, not turning around, "you're going to stay, right? After? When it's over?" The question landed somewhere Evelyn wasn't prepared for. She opened her mouth and nothing came for a moment, and in that moment Clara walked out the door and the question went unanswered. She was still sitting at the table when Cole came in from the morning feeding. He looked at her, read the room the way he'd learned to, and poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of her without comment. Clara asked me if I'm going to stay, Evelyn said. He sat down. He wrapped his hands around his cup. What did you say? He asked. She left before I answered. A silence. Then, what would you have said? Evelyn looked at her coffee. It was a question that pointed in a direction she hadn't fully permitted herself to look yet, because staying was not a decision she could make clearly in the middle of this, in the middle of a stolen money story and a returned sham fiancé and a town making up its mind about her. Staying was a decision that required solid ground, and the ground was not solid yet. I don't know, she said, honest, as she tried to be with him. Ask me when it's over. He nodded. He didn't push it. She had noticed this about him, that he asked the question and then let it sit, didn't lean on it, didn't try to extract more than she was ready to give. It was a quality she'd had to get used to, because she'd spent enough of her life around men who filled silence with pressure. They drank their coffee. The morning came in through the kitchen window, plain and cold and exact. And 2 miles away, in the back room of the saloon, Gerald Holt was sitting across a table from a land broker named Sykes, explaining very carefully that the situation with the woman at the Brennan Ranch needed to be resolved before Ferris had any reason to open his survey books to outside inquiry, and that the fastest way to resolve it was to make sure the story got loud enough and fast enough that the woman left town before anyone thought to look too carefully at whose name was really on what deed. Sykes listened. He had the kind of face that didn't give a great deal away, which was probably why Holt liked working with him. $40 is a respectable sum to accuse someone of taking, Sykes said. It is, Holt agreed. But you'd need someone willing to formally back the claim. Sykes looked at him. You filed anything yet? Not yet. Wanted to see if the pressure moved her first. Sykes nodded slowly. He looked at his hands. And if it doesn't move her? A pause. Then we make the pressure heavier, Holt said. He said it the way a man says something when he has made a decision he doesn't particularly like, but has decided is necessary, which is to say he said it in a way that suggested he was already halfway to talking himself into whatever was going to come next. He poured himself another drink and looked at the back wall of the saloon, as if whatever he was planning was already out there in the future, already built, just waiting for him to catch up to it. He did not think about Evelyn Harper as a person. He had stopped doing that some time ago. She had become, in his mind, an obstacle. And obstacles, in Gerald Holt's experience, had always eventually moved, one way or another. He had not yet encountered the specific complication of an obstacle that didn't know it was supposed to. The formal accusation arrived on a Friday. Evelyn knew before Cole told her, because she had woken that morning with the specific feeling of a day that had already made up its mind about itself. A heaviness in the air that wasn't weather, a quiet in the house that felt less like peace and more like held breath. She had made breakfast and done the morning work and said nothing about the feeling, because feelings of that kind were not things she had ever learned to say out loud, and because Clara was at the table eating her oatmeal with the focused innocence of a child who did not yet know what the day was going to bring. Cole came in from town at mid-morning. He had not told her he was going. She had not asked. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and took his hat off, which he only did inside when he had something to say that required the full weight of his presence. And he looked at her with the expression of a man who has confirmed something he was hoping wouldn't be confirmed. He filed, Cole said. Evelyn set down the mending she was holding. When? This morning. First thing. Cutter showed me the paper. He came and sat at the table. Formal accusation of theft. $40, as stated. He's got a witness. Who? Sykes. Cole said the name like something that tasted bad. Land broker out of Delacroix. Says he was present when Holt counted out the money and put it in the envelope. Evelyn thought about this. A witness who had materialized from 2 counties east, who happened to be in business with the man filing the accusation, who was willing to say he had watched money go into an envelope that had arrived empty. She thought about the neat, practiced quality of it, the way it covered exactly the right gap in Holt's story. Too neat. Cutter has to investigate now, she said. He does. He wants to speak with you tomorrow morning. All right. Cole looked at her. You're not... He stopped. What? I thought you'd be more... He turned the hat in his hands. Most people would be frightened. I am frightened, she said. That's different from showing it. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him deciding something. He put the hat on the table and looked at her directly, with the kind of directness that he didn't deploy casually. "I'm going to stand beside you in that office," he said. "I want you to know that before tomorrow." She felt something move in her chest that she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude exactly. Gratitude was too small for it. More like the specific relief of a person who has been carrying something alone and has just been told they don't have to anymore, which is a different thing from being told it will be all right, and considerably more valuable. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to." She picked up the mending again. Her hands needed something to do. "Clara will hear about it. She'll hear about it regardless. Better she hears it with us standing upright." Outside, the wind was moving through the dry grass the way it always did this time of year. A low, constant sound like something trying to say something it couldn't quite form into words. Evelyn pushed the needle through the fabric and pulled the thread taut and thought about Gerald Holt in Sheriff Cutter's office that morning, holding his hat and speaking in the reasonable tone of a wronged man. And she thought about the $40 that had never existed and the witness who had appeared from thin air, and underneath the thinking was a cold, clear anger that she was not going to let herself feel all the way through right now, because this was not the moment for it. The moment for it would come. She was fairly certain of that. Sheriff Cutter's office, the next morning, had the quality of a room where people came to say things they'd rehearsed. Cutter himself sat behind his desk with his habitual expression of reserved judgment, and across from him sat Evelyn, and beside Evelyn, near enough that his presence was unambiguous but far enough that he wasn't crowding her, sat Cole Brennan. Cutter had looked at Cole when they came in together. Cole had looked back with the steady patience of a man who has decided something and is not going to be moved from it by a look. Cutter had nodded once, slightly, and begun. He asked her the expected questions. When she had received the letter, what the letter said, whether there had been any money inside, whether she had at any point been in possession of $40 belonging to Gerald Holt. He asked them carefully, in order, with the methodical attention of a man who takes his job seriously and does not enjoy being used for other people's purposes. Evelyn answered each one. She answered them plainly and without elaboration, because she had learned a long time ago that the person who adds too much to an answer is the person who looks like they are building a story rather than telling one. When she was done, Cutter folded his hands. "Sykes says he watched Holt count the money," he said. It wasn't a question. He was giving her the chance to respond to it. "Sykes works with Holt on a land claim east of town," Evelyn said. "He stands to benefit from Holt's position being settled favorably." Cutter glanced at Cole. "That's accurate," Cole said. "Section 12, east of the Harrow Creek boundary. There's a survey dispute. Ferris has documents." A pause. Cutter's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recalibration, a slight adjustment of the angle from which he was looking at the situation. "Ferris," he said. "The surveyor," Cole said. "He did the original boundary work on that parcel. If Holt's claim doesn't hold up, he loses the land, which means the deal he's working with Sykes falls apart." Cutter looked at Evelyn. "You knew this when you came in here?" "My situation and his land claim are connected," she said. "He came back to town because of the land. The accusation against me is meant to make the noise too loud for anyone to look at what's underneath." It was a direct thing to say. She knew it. She said it anyway, because the alternative was being careful in a way that cost her more than it protected her. Cutter was quiet for a long moment. "I'll need to speak with Ferris," he said, "and I'll need to speak with Holt again." He looked at her steadily. "Miss Harper, I want you to stay available. Don't leave town. Don't go anywhere that makes it look like you're putting distance between yourself and this." "I have no intention of leaving," she said. They walked out into the cold morning air, and Cole put his hat back on, and they stood for a moment on the board sidewalk outside the sheriff's office. "He believes you," Cole said. "He's not sure yet. He's more sure than he was before you said the part about the land." She pulled her coat tighter. "Or he thinks I'm clever, and I found a way to muddy the water." Cole turned to look at her. "Is that what you think he thinks?" "I think I can't know what he thinks. I think the only thing I can control is what I do." She started toward the wagon. "I'd like to speak to Ferris myself." Cole fell into step beside her. "I thought you might." Jadida Ferris occupied a small office attached to the back of the Telegraph building, a room so dense with rolled paper and stacked ledgers, and flat wooden cases of drawing instruments that there was barely room for two people to stand in it comfortably. He was a small man in his late 60s, with the precise, slightly suspicious manner of someone who deals in measurements and has developed a professional distrust of approximation. He looked at Evelyn and Cole in the doorway of his office with the expression of a man trying to calculate, from available evidence, whether this was going to be a problem. "Mr. Brennan," he said, "and this would be the woman Holt's making noise about." "Evelyn Harper," she said. He studied her. "Come in, then. Though I'll tell you straight that I haven't decided yet what I'm going to say to Cutter when he comes asking." "That's why we're here," Cole said, "to help you decide." Ferris made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Most people help me decide by trying to tell me what to say. I don't take well to that." "I'm not going to tell you what to say," Evelyn said. "I'm going to ask you what you actually know and let you work out what to do with it." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he stepped back and let them in. The survey documents were in a flat case beneath two other flat cases and a stack of ledgers that Ferris moved with the particular careful speed of a man who knows exactly where everything is and doesn't trust anyone else to touch it. He extracted the papers and laid them on the one clear surface in the room, a drafting table that was otherwise covered in tools, and smoothed them flat with the back of his hand. "Section 12, he said, "east of Harrow Creek." He pointed to a line on the survey map. "Holt's claim puts the eastern boundary here. My original survey puts it here." His finger moved perhaps an inch on the paper, which represented, he explained, approximately 40 yards on the ground. 40 yards is enough to change whose land the creek access falls on, and the creek access is worth considerably more than 40 yards of scrub grass. Evelyn looked at the map. "When did Holt file?" 14 months ago, filed with the eastern boundary as I've marked it. But when he submitted the claim documents to the Territorial Land Office, the boundary had moved." Ferris tapped the paper. "Not by much, but by enough." "He changed the filing documents," Cole said. "I can't say who changed them. I can say what my original survey shows and what the filing documents show, and they don't match." Ferris folded his hands on top of the drafting table. "I wrote to the land office 3 months ago pointing out the discrepancy. They wrote back saying the matter was under review." He looked at Cole. "Then Holt came back to town, and within a week I started hearing his name connected to a woman and a missing $40. The room was quiet except for the sound of wind against the single small window. "He's trying to establish himself as the wronged party before you can establish him as the one doing the wronging," Evelyn said. "That would be my assessment," Ferris agreed. "Will you tell Cutter what you told us?" Ferris was quiet for a moment. He looked at the survey map the way you look at a thing you have been looking at for a while and have recently seen in a new light. "The land dispute and the accusation against you are separate matters," he said. "Legally." "They are," Evelyn said, "but they're not separate in practice. He came back to town for the land, and the accusation against me is meant to get him time and noise to deal with it. If you talk to Cutter, Cutter can see the full picture. If you don't, he's working with half of it." Ferris looked at her. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Holt described you as—" He paused, apparently reconsidering whatever exact words Holt had used. "Emotional, unstable, the kind of woman who would do something impulsive and then lie about it." Evelyn held the old surveyor's gaze. "And you're sitting in my office asking clear questions and following a logical sequence." He picked up the survey map and rolled it with practiced efficiency. "I'll talk to Cutter." What happened between Friday and the following Tuesday happened quickly and not quickly at the same time, the way events do when they have been building under the surface for a while and finally come up into air. Cutter spoke to Ferris. Ferris showed him the documents. Cutter went back to Holt with questions that were sharper and more specific than the ones Holt had been expecting. And Holt, unused to being asked things that required precise answers rather than general impressions, gave answers that did not entirely hold together. Evelyn was not present for any of this. She was at the ranch, working, because that was what she did when she was frightened, and there was nothing direct she could do about the source of the fear. She mended 2 of Cole's winter shirts, and repaired a loose board on the porch step, and taught Clara to make cornbread from scratch, which Clara approached with the focused ambition of someone determined to master it immediately, and which they ate that evening slightly underdone in the middle because Clara had not wanted to wait the full time. "It needs more time in the oven," Evelyn told her. "It tastes fine," Clara said. eating it with the conviction of someone who has decided not to acknowledge a failure. It tastes like you got impatient. Maybe I did. Clara took another bite. Papa does this too. He starts things and then wants them to be done before they're done. Cole looked up from his own piece of underdone cornbread. I'm sitting right here. I know, Clara said. Evelyn almost smiled. Almost. The specific shape of the almost. The brief involuntary softening at the corner of her mouth that she didn't quite let become a full expression was something Cole noticed and didn't mention, but it stayed with him later in the evening after Clara was in bed and the house had gone quiet. He sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee gone cold and thought about how strange it was that a person you had not known existed 6 weeks ago could become, so quickly, someone whose almost smile you noticed and filed away. He was not sure what to do with that. He was a man who did not trust himself with feelings that moved fast. His wife had taken 4 days to go from healthy to gone, and after that he had developed a deep instinctual caution about anything that could be taken away quickly. Wanting something was, in his experience, the fastest way to give the world a target. But he sat on the porch steps and he thought about the almost smile, and he didn't not think about it, and he decided that was about as far as he was going to get on the subject tonight. On Tuesday, Cutter sent word asking Holt to come to the office. He sent the same word to Evelyn. He also, on his own initiative, sent word to several other people. The station master Purvis, who had found the letter under the counter, old Ferris, who brought his rolled survey documents, and 2 members of the town council who Cutter apparently felt should witness what was about to happen for reasons that would become clear. The office was not large enough for all of them comfortably. Holt arrived first and took the chair that put his back to the window, which Evelyn noticed was a choice. The light would be in the faces of anyone looking at him. She chose a position near the door, not because she was planning to leave, but because she wanted to see everyone's face clearly. Cole stood beside her. He had not been asked to be there. Cutter had looked at him when he came in and had, once again, looked away without comment, which Evelyn was beginning to understand was Cutter's way of deciding that something was acceptable without being obliged to say so officially. Sykes was there as well, Holt's witness, the land broker from Delacroix. He sat in the corner with the particular alertness of a man who is trying to calculate how quickly a situation is changing. Cutter began. He was methodical, and he was thorough, and he was fair, in a way that Evelyn found she respected, even when some of what he said was uncomfortable to hear. He laid out the accusation. He laid out what Holt had said. He laid out what Sykes had said. Then he turned to Ferris. Ferris did not speak in the manner of a man making accusations. He spoke in the manner of a man presenting measurements. He showed the survey map. He showed the filed boundary documents. He showed the letter he had sent to the Territorial Land Office. He pointed to the discrepancy. 40 yards, the creek access, the value it represented, with the flat precision of someone who has spent decades dealing in facts and has very little patience for anything that isn't one. Holt interrupted twice. Cutter stopped him both times. When Ferris finished, Cutter looked at Sykes. You witnessed Mr. Holt count out $40 and put it in the envelope addressed to Miss Harper, Cutter said. On what date? Sykes named a date. Cutter looked at Purvis. Purvis was sweating. He was a small man at his best, and at this particular moment he was a smaller version of himself, hunched under the weight of 22 days of misplaced correspondence and the slow, terrible realization that he was in the room where the consequences of that were being settled. He looked at Sykes. He looked at the date Sykes had named. He pulled a small ledger from his coat pocket, a log of received and outgoing correspondence, which he apparently kept with the obsessive tidiness of a man who had lost something important once and never intended to repeat it. That date, Purvis said, finding the page. That date, Mr. Holt was observed in this office requesting that a letter be held for a recipient arriving by train. He ran his finger down the log. He did not. I did not. There is no record of a separate transaction. He was here once. He handed me one letter. He looked up. There was no one else here. There was no one named Sykes anywhere near this office on that date. The room went very quiet. Evelyn was watching Holt's face. She saw the moment it shifted, the moment the performance of the wronged man cracked along a seam that had always been there and let something else show through. It was not dramatic. It was small. A slight tightening around the eyes. A barely perceptible adjustment of posture. The face of a man who has just understood that the room has turned. Purvis is mistaken, Holt said. His voice was even. She had to grant him that. The voice held, even when the face had slipped. His log would be mistaken, Holt said. He's already admitted he lost the letter for 3 weeks. A man who loses a letter can misread his own records. His log shows daily entries in the same handwriting throughout, Cutter said. It's consistent. Yours and Sykes's accounts of the date are not consistent with anything else in this room. Then something is wrong with the log. Mr. Holt. Cutter's voice had not raised. It had done the opposite, gone quieter, with the particular quality of quiet that means the speaker is done being patient. I've been doing this work for 19 years. I've sat in this office with people telling me things that didn't hold together, and I've sat in this office with people telling me things that did. What you're telling me has stopped holding together. Holt looked at Evelyn. It was a reflex, she thought, looking at the source of the problem the way you look at the thing you tripped on. His eyes were calculating, not guilty. He was still working the problem, still turning it, looking for the angle. She came here with nothing, Holt said. She had no money. She had no arrangements. She arrived expecting the arrangement you made in writing over 4 months of correspondence, Cole said. It was the first thing Cole had said in the office. Everyone looked at him. He was standing near the door with his hands at his sides, and his expression was exactly what it always was. Contained, direct, a little tired. You wrote her letters, Cole said. I've read them. She brought them with her. You made specific representations about a specific arrangement, and then you left before she arrived and you pocketed whatever money you claimed to have sent her, and when she stayed in this county, instead of disappearing the way you'd hoped, you came back here to make enough noise that no one would look at your land filing before you could get it sorted. He paused. That's what happened. And most of the people in this room can see that's what happened. Holt stood up. You have no— Sit down, Mr. Holt, Cutter's voice. Flat and final. Holt sat down. It was not a choice exactly. It was the absence of anywhere else to go. One of the town council members, an older man named Whitfield, who had been present through all of this with the carefully neutral expression of someone weighing things, cleared his throat. Sheriff, the land filing. That's a matter for the territorial office, Cutter said. I've already drafted a letter. Ferris's documents will accompany it. And the accusation against Miss Harper? Cutter looked at Holt. Holt was looking at the floor. Sykes had shifted in his chair until he was barely still in it, the posture of a man calculating exits. There is no credible evidence supporting the accusation, Cutter said. The witness account contradicts the station log and cannot be independently verified. The accusation is without foundation. He looked at Evelyn. Miss Harper, I'm sorry for the circumstances. She nodded once. She did not say anything. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth right now, something would come out. That was not the kind of thing you said in the county sheriff's office, and she had worked too hard on her composure over the past 2 weeks to spend it now. What she felt was not triumph. Triumph was not the right word for it. It was more like the cessation of something, a pressure she had been holding against for long enough that she had stopped noticing she was holding against it. And now that it had stopped, her whole body was recalibrating. Relief, yes, but the complicated kind, threaded through with the residue of everything that had made the relief necessary. She walked out of the office into the cold morning air. Cole came out behind her. They stood on the sidewalk and the town went about its business around them, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It's over, Cole said. The official part, she said. He looked at her. People will remember what they thought before they knew the truth, she said. That doesn't go away overnight. She paused. I'm not complaining. I'm just being accurate. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Claire's going to want to celebrate. Claire's going to make more cornbread. Probably underdone again. Probably. Something that was fully a smile this time moved across Evelyn's face. Cole saw it and looked away with the slightly arrested expression of a man who is not going to say what he's thinking, which was that he hadn't seen her smile like that before, and that it was a considerable thing to be on the receiving end of, even sideways. What happened next happened in the way that things happen in small towns when the story has turned. Not all at once, but in a series of small adjustments, like a row of pictures being straightened on a wall. Martha Alderman from the laundry appeared at the dry goods store the following morning with information. She felt people should know, which was that she had spoken to Cutter herself, and the woman at the Brennan Ranch was completely cleared, and anyone who had been saying otherwise ought to be ashamed of themselves. This statement was delivered with the righteousness of a woman who had never been among those saying otherwise, which was not entirely true, but which no one present felt like contesting. Gemma Alcott's mother sent a note to the ranch. It was a short note. It said that she hoped there were no hard feelings and that she had only been repeating what others had said. Evelyn read it and set it on the table and did not write back, not because she was holding a grudge, but because there was nothing to say that was both honest and polite. The children at Clara's school, who had the natural flexibility of people whose positions are not yet calcified by pride, mostly moved on within a day. Gemma Alcott did not push Clara in the coat room. Tommy Brewer said nothing at all. This was not an apology, but it was, in the way of children, an acknowledgement. Holt left town 2 days after the meeting in Cutter's office. He left the same way he had the first time, on a horse with 2 saddlebags early in the morning before most people were awake. But this time, the leaving had a different quality. The first time he had left ahead of something. This time, he was leaving behind it. That was a different kind of leaving. Sykes returned to Delacroix. The land claim went to the territorial office for review, which meant it would sit in a pile with other disputed claims for months, possibly years, going nowhere. The creek access remained in question. That was not Evelyn's problem, and she noted with some satisfaction that it was very much Holt's. It was on the Thursday of that week, 4 days after the office meeting, 9 days before the first snow of the season, that something happened that Evelyn had not anticipated and that rearranged things more than any of what had come before. She was alone in the house. Cole was at the eastern pasture. Clara was at school. The house had the particular quality of empty that is different from lonely. Not vacant, but restful, the way a thing rests between uses. Evelyn was going through the last of the mending, working at the kitchen table with the afternoon light coming in from the south window at the angle she'd come to know was the best light of the day in this house. She found the letter at the bottom of the mending basket. It was not addressed to her. It was addressed, in a child's careful handwriting, to no one. Not a letter meant to be sent, but a letter meant to be kept. Clara's handwriting, unmistakably, in the round practiced letters of a child who has been working at penmanship. She should not have read it. She knew that. She read it. "Dear Mama," it began. "I know you can't read this, but Miss Evelyn says sometimes writing things down helps, even when you can't send it anywhere. She didn't say I should write to you specifically, but that's what I thought of. I wanted to tell you that someone came, and I think she might stay. She fixes things, and she listens when I talk, and she doesn't say, 'That's enough, Clara,' the way the Alcott woman did when I stayed for supper that one time. Papa seems less, I don't know the word. He seemed like a clock that had stopped. Now he seems like one that's going again, but slowly, like it's getting used to moving. I don't know if she's going to stay. I asked her, but she didn't answer. I think she is scared of something. I think maybe she is scared of wanting things. I think Papa is scared of that too. I think they are the same kind of scared, and maybe that's why it works." The letter ended there, mid-thought, as if Clara had been called away and never came back to finish it. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with it in her hands for a long time. She acknowledged to herself with the full, unguarded honesty of being entirely alone, scared of wanting things. Clara was right. She had spent enough of her life wanting things that hadn't come through. The right kind of life in Cincinnati. The honest man she had believed in for 4 months on the evidence of 6 letters. The future that had evaporated before she stepped off the train. That wanting had started to feel dangerous, like a habit that cost more than it returned. But she was sitting in this kitchen with the south light coming through the window at the angle she knew, in a house where a child had written to her dead mother to say that someone came and might stay. And the someone was Evelyn Harper from Cincinnati, with a battered suitcase and a repaired hairbrush, and a capacity for doing what needed doing that had not yet found its full use. She put the letter back in the basket, exactly where she had found it. She folded the mending she had finished and set it in its pile. She got up and started supper. When Clara came home from school that afternoon, she came into the kitchen the way she always did and read the room and found it peaceful, and she dropped her things and said, "What's for supper?" with the directness of someone who has decided that the world is, at least for today, operating according to expectations. "Chicken," Evelyn said. "With the herbs?" "With the herbs." Clara pulled up a chair to watch. This was something she had started doing in the 3rd week. Not helping exactly, but observing, as if she were cataloging something she intended to reproduce later. Tommy Brewer apologized today, she said. Evelyn kept her eyes on what she was doing. Did he? He said it wrong. He said sorry if you felt bad, which isn't a real apology. Clara paused. I told him that. Good. He looked surprised. People usually are, Evelyn said. People usually are, Evelyn said, when someone refuses to accept a bad apology. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, are you going to stay? The question again. The same question from the porch steps. The same question underneath everything. The one that had been sitting in the room between them since before any of this had resolved, since before the sheriff's office and the survey documents and the land claim and Holt's second leaving. Evelyn set down the knife she was holding. She turned and looked at Clara, at this child who had noticed a woman crying at the end of a train platform and had asked her father a question that had changed the trajectory of 4 lives, possibly 5 if you counted the mare in the last stall and her coming foal. Ask me again tomorrow, Evelyn said. I want to tell you properly. Clara looked at her with the evaluating gravity of a 7-year-old who knows when an adult is buying time and is deciding whether to accept it. She decided to accept it. Okay, she said. Tomorrow. Cole came in as the light was fading and supper was on the table, and Clara was telling a story about the surveyor's dog that had apparently gotten into the schoolyard that afternoon and caused a considerable interruption, and the kitchen was warm and smelled of chicken and herbs, and Cole sat down and listened to his daughter with the expression Evelyn had come to recognize, the one that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the same neighborhood as one. And once, in the middle of Clara's story, his eyes moved across the table to Evelyn's, and what passed between them in that second was not a declaration of anything, but it was an acknowledgement, and acknowledgements, in Evelyn's experience, were where everything real had to start. She told Clara the next morning. Not with a speech. Evelyn was not a woman who made speeches, and Clara was not a child who sat still for them. It happened the way most real things happened in that house, which was sideways and without much ceremony, in the middle of something else entirely. They were at the kitchen table after breakfast. Cole had already gone out. The dishes were done, and Clara had her school things spread in front of her, a reader, a slate, a piece of chalk worn down to a nub. And she was working on something with the focused frown of a child who is trying to get a letter right. Evelyn was at the counter measuring out flour for the week's bread, and the kitchen had the comfortable morning sound of 2 people occupying the same space without needing to fill it with words. You said to ask you today, Clara said. She didn't look up from the slate. Evelyn kept measuring. I did. So I'm asking. A pause. The flour settled into the bowl. Outside, the wind had picked up. The particular cold wind that had been coming down off the mountains for 3 days, carrying in it the smell of something that was going to be snow before the week was out. I'm staying, Evelyn said. Clara looked up. Her face did several things at once, relief, satisfaction, and underneath both of those, something more complicated, the expression of a child who has been hoping for something long enough that receiving it arrives with a slight disorientation, the way your eyes adjust when you come in from bright light. Okay, she said. Then, for how long? Evelyn turned from the counter. I don't know yet. That's an honest answer. Clara thought about this with the seriousness she brought to things she cared about. Is it because of Papa? It's because of the ranch, and because of you, and because of... Evelyn paused. Because I'm useful here, and because it's the first place in a long time where I felt like myself. Clara chewed on the end of her chalk, which was a habit Evelyn had been trying to break her of for 2 weeks without success. That's not a no about Papa. Clara, I'm just saying. She looked back down at her slate. He's better with you here. He laughs more, not big laughs, small ones. But still. Evelyn turned back to the flower. She did not respond to this directly because she was not ready to respond to it directly, and because some things, the specific thing Clara was pointing at, were not discussions she could have before she'd had them with herself first. But she heard it. She filed it. It went into the same place where she kept the letter in the mending basket, the almost smiles, the evenings on the porch, the way Cole had stood beside her in Cutter's office without being asked, and without making anything of it afterward. She was building something, she realized, slowly, without a blueprint, the way you build something when you're not sure yet what it's supposed to be, but you keep adding to it anyway because the alternative is stopping. She was not ready to call it what it was. but she was not going to stop. Cole found out the way he found out most things about his own household, which was last and from Clara. His daughter informed him at supper that evening, with the casual authority of someone delivering confirmed news, that Evelyn was staying. She said it between a spoonful of beans and a piece of bread, as if it were a piece of information on par with the school day's other events. And then she looked at her father's face, and the corners of her mouth did something that she was clearly trying to keep under control. Cole looked across the table at Evelyn. Evelyn met his eyes and said nothing, because there was nothing to add. The information was accurate. Clara had delivered it cleanly. Any elaboration would be more for Cole's benefit than for the truth of the thing, and she had made a private decision to stop performing clarity she didn't entirely have yet. "All right," Cole said. He picked up his fork. "Good." Clara looked between the two of them with the expression of someone who has set a small fire and is watching to see how it spreads. It did not spread in any direction that was visible, which Clara found mildly frustrating, but she was a patient child in the ways that mattered, and she returned to her supper with the air of someone who has planted something and is prepared to wait. That evening, after Clara was in bed, Cole found Evelyn on the porch. He brought 2 cups of coffee without being asked. He had started doing this at some point in the past week, appearing with coffee in the evenings, the way you do when a habit has organized itself without a formal decision. He sat on the top step. She was in the chair. The sky was doing what the sky did up here in early winter, big and black, and so full of stars it seemed almost excessive, like someone had overcommitted to the effect. "You don't have to explain it," he said. "I know. I'm not asking why. I know that too." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Are you asking anything?" He was quiet for a moment. The barn creaked once in the wind. Somewhere out in the dark, one of the horses shifted. "There are things I should probably say," he said. "At some point." He looked at his coffee. I don't move fast with things." "I've noticed. That probably frustrates you." "No," she said. And then, more carefully, "I've moved fast before. I crossed 800 miles on the strength of 6 letters. Fast doesn't have a good record with me." He looked at her then. It was the look he used when he was taking something seriously, direct, without the deflection he sometimes deployed when things got too close. "Fair enough," he said. They sat in the cold and drank the coffee, and the conversation did not go further than that, and neither of them felt that it needed to. There was a quality to the silence between them that Evelyn had not experienced with many people, a silence that was comfortable without being complacent, that didn't require filling, that left room for things to exist in it without demanding they be named. She thought about her mother's house in Cincinnati. She thought about the smell of it, the wool coats in the hallway, the particular soap her mother used, the sound the floorboards made in the second story. She thought about the letter she had finally written 2 weeks after arriving in Ashridge Crossing, when the words had arranged themselves into something she could send. Her mother had written back. The letter had arrived 3 days after the sheriff's office meeting, and it had said, in her mother's economical way, "I'm glad you're safe. I'm glad someone stood beside you. Tell me more about the ranch." Evelyn had read that letter twice and then written back 4 pages, which was 4 pages more than she usually wrote. She was going to have to write again soon, with updated information. She was not yet sure how to write the updated information, which was part of why she was sitting on a porch step at night in the cold, instead of inside where it was warm, turning things over in the way of a person who hasn't quite gotten to the bottom of them yet. The first snow came on Saturday, which was not a school day, and Clara greeted it with a volume of enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to the amount of snow, which was less than 2 inches and mostly gone by afternoon. She insisted on going out in it before breakfast, which Evelyn permitted on the condition that she wore her boots and her wool coat and her hat, all 3, no negotiating. Clara wore all 3, ran outside, stood in the snow for approximately 4 minutes, came back in because her hands were cold, and ate her breakfast with the expression of someone who has done what they set out to do and found it satisfying. Cole came in from the morning chores with snow on his shoulders and a look that said the cattle were going to need attention before the real winter settled in. He and Evelyn had a brief, practical conversation about supplies, what the ranch had, what it needed before the roads got difficult, and she made a list with the efficiency of someone who has been running a household long enough to know what gets forgotten. It was the most ordinary morning she could remember having in a long time. That was what she noticed about it. Not that it was pleasant, though it was. Not that it was warm, though the kitchen was. But that it was ordinary in the specific way of a life that has found its shape, where the tasks are familiar and the people are known, and the day fits the day before it without effort. She had not had that. She had not had it in Cincinnati, where ordinary had felt like something settling over her rather than something she was living in. She had not had it in the 4 months of letters to a man who turned out to be writing a fiction. She had not had it on the train or on the platform or in the first weeks at the ranch, when everything had been provisional, held at a slight remove from full commitment. She had it now. She was not sure when it had arrived, but it was there. The complication came, as the significant ones tend to, from an unexpected direction. Her name was Louise Holt. Gerald Holt's sister arrived in Ashridge Crossing on the Wednesday stage, 11 days after her brother had left it for the second time. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, narrow in the way of someone who has spent considerable energy on self-containment, with the kind of composed expression that made it hard to tell whether she was intelligent or just careful. She checked into the hotel, sent a note to the sheriff's office informing Cutter of her presence and her intentions, and then she sent a second note, delivered by the hotel's boy, to the Brennan Ranch. The note said, "Miss Harper, I understand you have reason to dislike my family's name. I am not here to defend my brother. I am here to speak with you on a matter that may be in your interest. I will be at the hotel dining room at noon tomorrow if you are willing. You are under no obligation. Louise Holt." Evelyn read it twice. She handed it to Cole without comment. Cole read it. "I'll come with you," he said. "Let me go alone first." He looked at her. "If she wanted trouble, she would have done something different," Evelyn said. "She went to Cutter before she went to us. That's not the move of someone looking to cause problems." She paused. "I want to hear what she has to say without anyone else's reaction in the room." He didn't like it. She could see that clearly, but he handed the note back and said, "All right, but you tell me everything she says." "Everything," she agreed. Louise Holt was already at the table when Evelyn arrived, seated with a cup of tea in a posture that had been learned early and maintained through considerable discipline. The posture of a woman who had decided that how she held herself in a room was something she could control even when other things weren't. She stood when Evelyn came in, which was not a thing most women did, and held out her hand. "Miss Harper, thank you for coming." Miss Louise Holt." She sat down when Evelyn did. "I want to begin by saying that what Gerald did to you was wrong. Not just the accusation, the whole of it, the correspondence, the arrangement, the abandonment." She said it with the clipped precision of someone who has rehearsed an acknowledgement enough times that the emotion has been compressed down to something manageable but is still visible if you know to look. "He is my brother, and I don't stop caring about him because of what he is. But I am not blind to what he is." Evelyn looked at her across the table. "Why are you here, Miss Holt?" "Because Gerald borrowed money from me to fund the land claim," Louise said. "A significant sum. And because that claim is now under territorial review and may be invalidated, which means the money is unlikely to be recovered from the land deal." She set her cup down precisely. "Gerald has a habit of making messes and leaving them for others to live in. I've been cleaning up after him for 20 years. I'm tired of it. I'm not sure what that has to do with me. The survey documents that Ferris provided, there are related documents, letters between Gerald and the original landowner going back 18 months. Gerald has them, or had them." Louise folded her hands on the table. "Before he left town the second time, he sent a parcel to a postbox in my name. I believe those letters are in the parcel. I believe they show that he knew about the survey discrepancy from the beginning and deliberately filed a false boundary claim." Evelyn was still. "Deliberate falsification of a land filing is a criminal matter." "Yes," Louise said, "and you're telling me this because those letters also show when the land claim was filed and what the financial arrangements were around it." Louise looked at her steadily. "The timeline of the correspondence with you, the letters he wrote, the money arrangement, overlaps precisely with the period when he was trying to raise money for the claim. I believe he intended to use the mail order arrangement to access funds, that when you arrived without the money he expected, he left, and that the $40 he accused you of taking was money he had taken himself from the arrangement fund. The hotel dining room had a low ceiling and tables that were too close together, and the smell of old cooking fat that no amount of ventilation entirely cleared. Evelyn sat in it and looked at Louise Holt and thought about 6 letters she had received over 4 months, each one full of the future tense, and understood something she hadn't quite fully understood before, which was that she had not been a person to Gerald Holt at all. She had been a line item, a potential source of funds for a land scheme that was already underway, dressed up in the language of marriage and partnership and a shared life. It was a particular kind of being wronged, she thought, not the usual kind where someone knows who you are and decides you don't matter, the kind where someone doesn't know who you are at all. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "The parcel has to be opened by someone with the legal standing to act on the contents," Louise said. "I am his sister. Technically, I am the named holder of the postbox, but the law is unclear about whether that gives me the right to open materials he sent to himself in my name. Cutter has agreed to oversee the opening, but he suggested it would be appropriate for the aggrieved party, that's you, to be present." "When?" "Tomorrow afternoon, if you're willing." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table. She looked at Louise Holt's hands, folded precisely on the tablecloth. The hands of a woman who had spent a long time managing things that weren't supposed to be hers to manage. "Why didn't you stop him?" Evelyn asked. "If you knew what he was." Louise's expression didn't change, but something in it shifted. A slight movement in the eyes, an adjustment at the corners of the mouth that was not a smile. "People don't stop other people," she said. "They can only decide what they're willing to do when the consequences arrive." She paused. "I'm deciding now, Shab." Cole took it better than she expected. He took it with the quietness of a man who has been given more information than he was initially presented with and is rearranging things accordingly, which was how he took most significant information. "She could be working with him still," he said, "running some other angle." "She could be," Evelyn said, "but she went to Cutter first and she came to me directly. There was no—" She thought about how to say it. "There was no performance in the room. She wasn't trying to make me feel anything. She was telling me facts." Women can be very good at seeming straightforward. Evelyn looked at him. So can men. He acknowledged this with the small nod he used when he'd said something less fair than he intended. "Cutter's overseeing it. He'll be there." "Then I want to be there too." "I thought you might." He was standing at the kitchen counter. Clara was in bed. The house had gone quiet in the way it did after 9 o'clock. Settled, the day digested, the night doing its ordinary work. Cole was looking at the window above the sink, which showed nothing but dark and their own reflections. "I want to ask you something," he said. Evelyn waited. "When all of this is finished, the parcel, the territorial review, whatever comes from it, what do you want?" He looked at her. Not at the window. At her. "Not what's practical, not what makes sense. What do you want?" She had not been asked this in a long time. The directness of it, coming from him, who was not a direct man by habit, landed with more weight than it would have coming from someone for whom directness was automatic. She sat with the question for a moment. She allowed herself to actually sit with it, rather than redirecting it the way she usually redirected things that pointed too squarely at what she was afraid to want. "I want this," she said, "approximately this. The house, and the work, and Clara learning things, and the mare in foal in the spring." She paused. "And I want—" She stopped. "Say it," Cole said. Not impatiently, quietly, like he was making room for it. "I want to stop waiting to see if it gets taken away," she said. "I want to get far enough past the waiting that I can just have it." He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The fire in the stove made its small sounds. "I'm working on the same thing," he said, "for what it's worth." It was worth a great deal. She didn't say that. But she thought it, clearly and without the usual self-protective qualification, and the clarity of it felt like something changing. The parcel was opened in Cutter's office the following afternoon, in the presence of Cutter, Evelyn, Cole, Louise Holt, and the town's one lawyer, a man named Garrett, who had been practicing in Ashridge Crossing for 30 years, and who approached everything with the systematic patience of someone who has seen most categories of human error and is no longer surprised by any of them. The parcel contained what Louise had believed it would. There were 11 letters between Gerald Holt and the original owner of the Section 12 land, an elderly man named Oates who had since moved to live with his daughter in Tucson. The letters detailed the negotiation over the land, the agreed price, and critically, A conversation in which Holt acknowledged knowing about the survey discrepancy and proposed to the landowner a boundary adjustment that would benefit the claim, an adjustment that Oates had apparently rejected, and which Holt had then made anyway in the filing documents without Oates's knowledge or consent. There was also a set of account documents, a ledger, small and densely written. Garrett went through it with the deliberate attention of someone reading a text he wants to be sure he has right. When he looked up, his expression was the careful neutral of a man who has just confirmed something significant. "The correspondence with Miss Harper," he said, and looked at Evelyn. "The arrangement. There are entries here corresponding to the dates of the letters." He was accounting for the arrangement as a prospective source of funds. Garrett turned a page. There is an entry dated approximately 3 weeks before the train's arrival that reads, "Arrangement dissolved, funds not realized, correspondence closed." The room was quiet. "I was already accounting for me as a failed transaction," Evelyn said. Not with heat, with the flat, precise recognition of someone naming a thing accurately. "That would be the reading," Garrett said. Louise Holt was looking at her hands. Cutter set down the paper he was holding. "This goes to the territorial office, today." He looked at Garrett. "And the falsification of the land filing documents. That's criminal fraud." "It is," Garrett said. "He'll need to be located." "He will." Cutter looked at Evelyn. "This doesn't undo what you've been through in this town." "No," she said. "It doesn't. But it closes the record cleanly." He paused. "Your name is clear, Miss Harper. It was clear in this office a week ago. It's clear still now." She nodded. She looked at the parcel, the letters, the small, densely written ledger in which she had been a line item that didn't pay out. She thought about the first letter she had received from Gerald Holt, the one that had started everything, that had used the word partnership 4 times in 3 paragraphs, that had described a life-taking shape in language so persuasive she had read it 6 times in one evening. She thought about what a person was to another person when the other person didn't actually see them, and she thought about the distance between being seen and not being seen, and how long she had not known the difference because no one had shown it to her clearly enough. She knew the difference now. Louise Holt walked out of the office at the same time as Evelyn, and they stood for a moment on the board sidewalk, not quite together, but adjacent. The cold was sharp, and the sky was the flat white of a day, considering more snow. "Thank you," Evelyn said, "for coming forward." Louise was quiet for a moment. "I should have done something sooner, years ago." She looked down the street. "I keep thinking of you on that platform. Waiting. I wasn't waiting very long before things changed." "That's not—" Louise stopped. She looked at Evelyn with the expression of someone who wants to say something and is deciding whether to. "I looked for a way to write to you before all this, when I first found out what Gerald had done. I couldn't find an address." "You found me," Evelyn said. "Eventually." They looked at each other. 2 women who had been produced by different versions of the same man's carelessness, standing in the cold outside a county sheriff's office, neither one of them particularly certain what to say next. "I hope it works out here," Louise said finally. "It looks like it might." She walked back toward the hotel. Evelyn watched her go and thought that life was very strange and sometimes fair in the most oblique and belated ways. Cole appeared at her elbow. "Well," he said. "Well," she agreed. They walked back to the wagon. He helped her up without making a thing of it, just a steadying hand, brief, practical. And she let him, which was its own kind of thing. Well, the days that followed were quieter than any days since her arrival. Not uneventful. The ranch had its own constant small drama of animals and weather and things that needed doing, but quiet in the internal sense, the sense of a person who has been in a sustained defensive posture for long enough that when the threat finally goes, the relaxing of it is almost physical. She slept better. She noticed that. She had been sleeping the way you sleep when you're camping, never quite fully down, some part of you always listening for the thing that changes. Now she slept all the way to the bottom, and she woke less tired than she'd been in months. Clara noticed too, in the way she noticed things. "You look different," she said one morning. "Different how?" "Less like you're waiting for something bad." Evelyn considered this. "I suppose I am. Less." "Papa too." Clara ate a spoonful of porridge. "He whistled yesterday, while he was doing the harness. I haven't heard him whistle since before Mama got sick." Evelyn filed this. She was still filing things, still building the structure of this life one piece at a time, not rushing it. She had learned, the hard way, but thoroughly, that the things worth having were the ones that were built slowly enough to last, the ones that showed you their true shape before you committed to them. She wrote a long letter to her mother that week. She told her about the parcel and the letters and the cleared name. She told her about Clara and the cornbread and the letter in the mending basket that she had returned without mentioning. She told her about Cole, carefully, without claiming more than she knew, because her mother was a precise reader and would catch any exaggeration. She said, "Hi is a man who asks what I want and then lets the answer be whatever it is. I have not met many men who do that. I think it is rarer than people say." Her mother wrote back 12 days later, "It is rarer than people say. Be careful with it. Also, please send some of that cornbread recipe Clara has apparently mastered." She had not mastered it. The middle was still often underdone, but they were getting closer. It was on a Sunday evening, 3 weeks after Louise Holt had left Ashridge Crossing and the territorial office had formally acknowledged receipt of Ferris's documents and the criminal referral for Gerald Holt's land falsification, that Cole said the thing he had been building toward for a while. They were on the porch. Coffee. Stars. The mayor had been restless all week, a sign, the old ranch hand who came twice a week said, that the foal was close. "I've been thinking about something," Cole said. Evelyn waited. "You came here because someone made an arrangement and didn't keep it." He was looking at the barn. "I don't want to make an arrangement." She looked at him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Not an arrangement, I'm not talking about what's practical or what solves a problem." He turned his head and looked at her. "I'm talking about what I want, which is what you said you were working on, wanting something without waiting for it to go." The cold was sharp around the edges of the porch light. Inside, Clara was supposedly asleep, but was almost certainly reading by candlelight, which was a habit they had both decided, independently and without discussing it, to overlook. "I'm listening," Evelyn said. "I know you've been through something that makes trust a hard project," Cole said. "I'm not asking you to trust everything at once. I'm asking—" He stopped. He was not a man who found this easy, and he wasn't going to pretend he was. He tried again. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to try. With me. Not because you need somewhere to be, because you want to be here." The night was very still. The stars did their extravagant thing overhead. Evelyn looked at this man, at his hand still on his coffee cup, his shoulders that were tenser than usual, his face with its dark beard and its weather and its expression of someone who has asked a question they cannot take back and is not trying to. And she thought about what Clara had written to her dead mother. "I think she is scared of something. I think she is scared of wanting things." She was scared of wanting things. She was also, she acknowledged, in the process of wanting this very badly, and the wanting had been going on for long enough now that pretending otherwise was not something she was willing to do. "Yes," she said. Cole was quiet for a moment. Just a moment. Then something in his shoulders let go. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a small and unmistakable release, the way a held breath releases when the news is finally what you hoped it would be. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They sat in the cold and the stars did their work overhead, and the barn creaked once in the wind, and the mare in the last stall shifted her weight in the dark. And neither of them said anything further, and neither of them needed to, because there are moments where the words have done what words can do, and the rest of it belongs to something that doesn't have a name yet, but that is nonetheless already beginning. The foal came on a Tuesday, just before dawn. Evelyn heard the mare first, a low, restless sound that was different from the ordinary night noises of the barn, different enough that it pulled her up out of sleep before she'd fully decided to wake. She lay still for a moment, listening, and then she got up and put on her coat over her nightclothes and her boots without lacing them and went outside into the cold dark. Cole was already there. He had heard it too, apparently, because he was in the barn with a lantern when she came through the door, crouched in the last stall with his sleeves rolled and his expression the concentrated calm of a man who has done this before and knows that calm is the most useful thing he can offer. "She's close," he said, without looking up. Evelyn came and stood at the stall door. The mare, the gray one, the one she had asked about on her first evening here, the one Cole had said was well kept, was down on her side, breathing in the deliberate way of a creature doing hard work. The lantern threw a warm circle of light that made the barn feel smaller and more intimate than it was in daylight. "Is there anything to do?" Evelyn asked. "Wait," Cole said, "and be quiet." She was quiet. She was good at that. It took another 40 minutes. Cole stayed in the stall the whole time, not intervening, just present, which she had come to understand was its own kind of skill, knowing when your presence is enough and your hands would only be in the way. The foal came in the gray pre-dawn, wet and astonishing, and it lay on the straw for a moment with the complete stillness of something that hasn't yet understood. It exists, and then it moved, and the mare turned her head, and something happened in the stall that was too ordinary to be called a miracle, and too extraordinary to be called anything else. Evelyn had her fist pressed against her mouth. She didn't know when that had happened. Cole looked up and saw her face and looked away again quickly, with the slight care of a man who has just seen something private and is choosing to respect it. "Bay," he said. "Filly." "She's perfect," Evelyn said. "She's messy," he said. "Give her an hour." She gave her an hour. Then she went back to the house and made coffee and started breakfast. And when Clara came down at her usual time, earlier than most children, which was a quality Evelyn had come to appreciate, she found Evelyn at the stove in the kitchen warm and smelling of coffee and something in Evelyn's face that made Clara stop in the doorway. "Something happened," Clara said. "The foal came." Clara's eyes went wide. She turned immediately toward the door. "Boots?" Evelyn said. "Coat. Both." Clara was in the barn in under 2 minutes. Evelyn heard her voice from the kitchen, a high, involuntary sound of pure delight that carried clean across the cold morning air, and she stood at the stove and felt something she had no precise name for, except that it was warm, and it was full, and it was hers. They named the foal together, which was Clara's insistence and Cole's accommodation and Evelyn's quiet amusement at watching the negotiation. Clara wanted something that sounded important. Cole wanted something short. Evelyn suggested they consider what the filly actually looked like before deciding, which was practical advice that Clara accepted as a compromise and Cole accepted as a resolution. The filly was bay with a single white mark on her forehead. Not a star exactly, more like a thumbprint, as if someone had pressed their hand to her face when she was still being made. Clara decided immediately that her name was Penny, for reasons that had something to do with the story her teacher had read at school and which Clara explained at length while the filly stood on increasingly steady legs, and the mare watched with the alert, exhausted patience of new motherhood. "Penny," Cole said, trying it out. "It fits," Evelyn said. "You're agreeing with her so she'll stop explaining." "I'm agreeing with her because it fits." Clara looked between them with satisfaction. "Penny," she said definitively, and that was the end of the discussion. The foal was 6 days old when the letter arrived from the Territorial Land Office. Garrett brought it himself, which was how Evelyn knew it was significant. He was not a man who made unnecessary trips, and he came to the ranch on a Friday morning with his coat buttoned against the cold, and the particular careful expression of someone carrying news that he has already assessed and found to be good, but who is waiting to deliver it in person before allowing himself to show that. He sat at the kitchen table with coffee and laid the letter flat. The Territorial Office had completed its review of the Section 12 land claim. In light of Ferris's survey documents, the corrected boundary evidence, and the criminal referral for fraudulent filing, the claim as filed by Gerald Holt had been invalidated. The land reverted to the prior owner of record, Oates, the elderly man in Tucson, with the corrected boundaries as Ferris had originally surveyed them. The creek access was restored to the adjacent property. Gerald Holt had been located in a town 2 territories over, where he was being held pending extradition to face charges of fraudulent land filing and misrepresentation. Garrett set the letter down and folded his hands on the table. "It's done," he said, officially and completely. Cole had read the letter over Evelyn's shoulder. He straightened up. He said nothing for a moment. "Sykes?" Evelyn asked. "Cooperated once Holt was located. Gave a full account. He'll face some consequences, but lesser ones." Garrett picked up his coffee. "The main event is Holt. The charges are serious. He won't be operating in this territory again." Evelyn looked at the letter. She thought about this moment in Cutter's office. Sykes's testimony unraveling against Purvis's station log, Holt's face doing that small, definitive thing when he understood the room had turned. She thought about the parcel and the ledger and the entry that read, "Arrangement dissolved, funds not realized." She thought about the platform at Ashridge Crossing on the afternoon she had arrived, standing there with her battered suitcase, reading a letter that had no money in it, trying to work out what to do next. It was the strangest thing, she thought, to be sitting in a warm kitchen with the smell of coffee around her, and a good lawyer across the table delivering the official end of something, and to feel primarily, not triumph, not vindication exactly, but a deep structural relief, the kind that lives in the bones rather than the surface, the kind that comes when something you've been braced against for a long time finally, fully stops. "Thank you," she said to Garrett, "for the work you put into this." "It was not complicated work," he said. "The evidence was clear once it was assembled. The harder part was the assembling." He looked at her with the steady attention of a man who has watched a lot of people go through difficult things. "You did that part." She shook her head slightly. "Not alone." "No," he agreed. "Not alone." She wrote to her mother that evening. It was the longest letter she had written since leaving Cincinnati, 12 pages in her careful handwriting, and it covered everything: the foal and the land ruling and Garrett's visit, and the specific quality of the morning when she had stood in the barn and watched something new come into the world. She wrote about Clara's letter in the mending basket, which she had told no one about until now. She wrote about Cole and the porch and the stars and the word yes and what had come after it, which was not a dramatic change but a gradual deepening, the way a river gets deeper as you move away from the shallows. She wrote, "I know I came here looking for something and found something different from what I was looking for. I know that sounds like it should be a disappointment. It isn't. What I was looking for was a version of a life I'd been told was the right shape. What I found is a life that actually fits me, which I think is rarer and better, though I understand it took a considerable amount of trouble to locate." She sealed the letter and set it on the table to go out in the morning post. Then she sat for a moment in the quiet of the kitchen, with the fire doing its ordinary work in the stove and the sounds of the house settling around her. The creak of the upper floor, the wind at the north window, the distant sound of one of the horses shifting in the barn. And she thought about belonging. She had spent a long time not quite belonging to places. Cincinnati had been her mother's place, a place she had grown up in and was grateful for, but that had never felt like it was specifically hers. The life she had imagined with Gerald Holt had been a fantasy of belonging, the promised shape of it, the future tense of it, without any of the actual substance. Even her first weeks here had been provisional, held at a slight remove, as if she were trying the life on before committing to wear it. She was not trying it on anymore. She was in it. It was hers. That was not a small thing. She had underestimated, for most of her adult life, how much of a person's well-being depended on that, on the specific feeling of being in the right place, doing the right work, with the right people. She had thought it was secondary, something you settled into once the important arrangements were made. She understood now that it was the arrangement. Everything else was secondary to it. Spring came to the Brennan Ranch. The way spring came to high country, reluctantly, in stages, with several false starts and at least one late snow that undid a week of warming and made Clara extremely vocal in her objections. The kitchen garden came back, and this time Evelyn gave it serious attention, clearing the dead growth, turning the soil, planning what would go where with the methodical pleasure of someone who has decided that a thing is worth doing properly. Clara helped, which meant she mostly asked questions and relocated earthworms to places she felt were more suitable for them, but she was present and interested, and that was its own kind of helping. Cole built a fence extension for the eastern pasture that he had been meaning to build for 2 years. He did it over 3 weekends, working with the steady patience of a man who has remembered that things left undone tend to stay undone, and Evelyn brought lunch out to him on the second Saturday and sat on the fence rail while he ate, and they talked about nothing in particular: the garden, Clara's progress with long division, the filly who was already showing a personality that was somewhat larger than her size suggested. "She's going to be trouble," Cole said about the filly. "She's going to be wonderful," Evelyn said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "No," she said, "they're not." He looked at her with the look she had come to know well by now, the one that wasn't quite a smile but that meant something more specific than a smile would, something that had her name on it and nothing else. It was on one of those spring weekends that Cole asked her to marry him. He did it without build-up, without ceremony, without the elaborate architecture of a formal proposal, which was entirely in keeping with who he was and which she found she was grateful for. They were in the barn after the evening feeding. The filly was being curious about a bucket, and Evelyn was watching her with the particular fond attention that had developed over months of watching this animal grow from the wet, still thing on the straw into a quick and opinionated creature with opinions about everything. Cole said, "I want to marry you." Evelyn looked at him. "Not because it makes sense," he said, "though it does make sense because I want to." He paused. "And because Clara is already calling you." He stopped. A brief expression crossed his face, something between fondness and mild embarrassment. "She's been calling you something. In her head, apparently. She mentioned it to me." "What has she been calling me?" "Mama," he said, quietly. "Not to your face. She told me she wasn't sure if it was all right." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. The filly had lost interest in the bucket and was investigating Evelyn's coat pocket with a thoroughness that suggested prior experience finding things there, which was accurate. Evelyn put her hand on the filly's nose and held it there. "It's all right," she said. "Which part?" Cole asked. "Both parts," she said. "Yes to both." He let out a breath. She felt, rather than saw it, the release of it, the same quality as that night on the porch when his shoulders had let go, as if he were a man who held things tightly for a long time and had been practicing, slowly, the art of letting them rest. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. The filly pushed her nose more insistently into the coat pocket and found half a piece of dried apple, which she extracted with great satisfaction. Outside the barn, the spring evening was doing what spring evenings did here, going gold at the edges, the mountains taking on the purple-blue color of late light, the first insects starting their noise in the grass. It was not a dramatic moment. It was quiet and barn-smelling, and the filly was chewing the dried apple with focused contentment. It was not the moment Evelyn would have written in advance if she had been writing her own life, which she thought was probably the best thing that could be said about it. They were married in June, in the front room of the ranch house, with Cutter serving as witness and Garrett performing the civil ceremony and Clara standing beside Evelyn in a dress that had been let out twice in the past year because she was growing faster than her clothes could keep up with. Ferris came, which surprised Evelyn, and which the old surveyor explained was because he had been present at the beginning of the situation and felt entitled to be present at the end of it. Martha Alderman came because Martha Alderman came to everything, and because she had, Evelyn had to grant her this, been the first to publicly correct the narrative about the missing money, even if her correction had been deployed with rather more self-congratulation than was strictly necessary. Louise Holt sent a letter. She was living in Denver now, she wrote, which was far enough from the whole business to feel like a fresh start. And she was working in a hotel and finding it suited her, and she was glad the outcome had been what it was. She wished them well in the plain, direct way of someone who means exactly what they say. Evelyn wrote back. She did not know if they would correspond regularly or at all, but she felt that the connection deserved acknowledgement. Two women who had each, in their own way, been left holding the consequences of the same man's carelessness, and who had found in each other, briefly, something that looked like solidarity. The ceremony was short. Garrett was not a man who embellished. He said what was required, and Cole said his part, and Evelyn said hers, and neither of them cried, which Clara did, loudly and without apparent self-consciousness, and which she later defended by saying that tears at weddings were appropriate and she had done nothing wrong. "You didn't do anything wrong," Evelyn told her. "I know," Clara said. "I was just explaining." In the summer, she started teaching. It was not a plan she had formed in advance. It developed from a conversation with the school teacher, the young woman who was homesick and had apparently cried in front of her students that one time and had never entirely recovered her authority from it. The teacher had heard about Evelyn's background, and she came to the ranch one afternoon and asked, with the directness of someone who is past the point of being able to afford pride, whether Evelyn would be willing to teach reading to the younger children on the 2 days a week. The school combined age groups and the teacher was occupied with the older students. Evelyn said yes before she had finished thinking about it, which was unusual for her, and which she took as information about how much she had wanted it without knowing she did. She was not a natural teacher in the way some people are, effusive, easy with praise, instinctively warm in the classroom. She was patient and precise, and she did not talk down to children, and she did not pretend that the wrong answer was almost right when it was not. What she was, it turned out, was honest with them, and children who had been learning to read for a while and were stuck somewhere in the middle of it did not need warmth so much as they needed someone to show them exactly where the problem was and exactly how to fix it. By autumn, 3 children who had been reading significantly below their age level were not. This was reported to her by the teacher with more enthusiasm than Evelyn knew what to do with, and by Garrett, who was on the school board and apparently tracked these things, and by Martha Alderman, who reported it as if she had played a significant role in it, which she had not. Clara had opinions about having Evelyn at school. "It's strange," she said definitively at supper one evening. "Strange how?" Cole asked. "Strange because she's my—" Clara paused. She looked at Evelyn. "Do I call you Mama there at school?" Evelyn had thought about this. "What do you want to call me?" Clara thought about it with the seriousness she brought to things that actually mattered to her. "Mama," she said, "everywhere." She looked at her plate. "If that's all right." "It's all right," Evelyn said. Cole looked at his food. He was doing the thing where he was experiencing something he wasn't going to describe, and Evelyn had stopped expecting him to describe it, because she had learned to read the thing itself in his face and in his hands and in the quality of his silence. And what she read there was a man who had lost so much so fast, 4 days from a Monday to a Friday, and who had then spent 2 years learning to live in the aftermath, and who was now sitting at a table where his daughter had just said the word mama, and meant it, and was not talking about someone who was gone. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Just briefly, just enough. He turned his hand over and held hers. Clara watched this with the expression of someone who has gotten what she wanted and is trying to be dignified about it, and failing slightly because she was 8 years old and dignity was still something she was working on. The second winter on the ranch was different from the first in all the ways that mattered. The first winter, Evelyn had been living in the house, but not yet fully in the life. Still holding something in reserve, still waiting to see. The second winter she was in it completely, which meant that the difficult parts of it were also fully hers. The cold that came down off the mountains and made the morning work brutal. The weeks in January when the snow kept falling and the roads were impassable and the only world was the ranch itself, which was both enough and sometimes, on the 7th consecutive day of the same 4 walls, emphatically not enough. She and Cole fought twice that winter. Real fights, not the careful managed disagreements of 2 people who are still learning each other's weight. The first was about money, about the spring planting, about how much to risk on a larger crop when the ranch finances were still not comfortable, and she thought the risk was worth taking and he thought it wasn't. The second was about something smaller, which somehow made it worse, about a decision she had made regarding Clara's schooling without consulting him, which she had not done to undermine him, but which had landed that way. Neither fight resolved quickly or cleanly. The money fight took 3 days to settle, and they were both wrong in different proportions about different parts of it. The school fight was her fault, and she knew it and said so, which was hard to do and the right thing, and Cole received the apology the way he received most things, without making a performance of it, without extracting more than was offered. "I should have asked you first," she said. "You should have," he agreed. "I'm not good at asking. I'm used to just doing." "I know." He paused. "I'm not good at saying what I need. I'm used to just managing." They looked at each other across the kitchen table with the mutual recognition of 2 people who have identified a shared problem, which is not the same as having solved it, but is the necessary beginning. "We're going to do this again," she said. "Probably. As long as we come back to the table." "We'll come back to the table," he said. They did. They always did. That was not a small thing either, she was learning. The coming back was, in its own way, the whole of it. In the spring of the second year, Penny was old enough to be worked with, and Cole began the slow, patient process of getting her used to a halter and a lead. Clara insisted on being present for every session, which meant that Evelyn was also often present, because Clara without supervision around an opinionated young horse was a category of risk that both adults had independently assessed and decided required management. The filly had grown into exactly what she had promised to be, quick, curious, with a streak of stubbornness that she deployed at specific and inconvenient moments. She had also, through months of Evelyn and Clara's consistent attention, developed an affection for both of them that Cole noted with the dry amusement of a man who has watched his horses fall in love with his family and has no objection to it. "She likes Evelyn better than she likes me," Clara announced one afternoon, with the scientific neutrality of someone reporting an observed fact. "She doesn't like anyone better than she likes you," Evelyn said. "She just respects me more." "What's the difference?" Cole from across the paddock where he was pretending to check the fence. "That's a good question." "It's the difference," Evelyn said, "between what you want from someone and what you rely on them for. She wants your company. She relies on my consistency." She paused. "People are the same way." Clara thought about this for a while. Then, "Which one is better?" "Both," Evelyn said. "You want both." Yeah. "There is a thing that happens to some people. If they are willing to wait long enough and move through enough wrong turns without losing the thread of themselves, where the life they end up in is so specifically suited to who they actually are that it feels almost impossible that it happened by accident, not handed to them, not easy, but fitted, the way a well-made thing fits the purpose it was made for." Evelyn Harper, Evelyn Brennan. Now, though she kept both names in her own mind, because Harper was where she came from, and Brennan was where she had arrived, and both of those things were true, was not a woman who would have described her life in poetic terms. She was too practical for that, too given to accuracy over sentiment. She would have said she had been wrong about one thing, and it had led her, indirectly and at considerable cost, to a thing she had not known to want, which had turned out to be exactly right. She would have said, "Belonging is not something that gets handed to you. It is something you earn through the accumulation of days, through doing the work and staying through the difficult parts, and coming back to the table and showing up for other people in ways they don't always ask for, but that they notice and remember." She had been allowed to do that work here, in this place, with these people, and the result was a life that was hers in a way that no previous version of her life had been. She would have said, if someone had asked her what she had learned, that the thing Gerald Holt had done to her, which was treat her as an instrument rather than a person, had in the end been the thing that brought her to the place where she was seen most clearly. That being discarded can, if you refuse to accept that it defines you, become the beginning of the only story worth telling. She would have said, probably, that she was aware of how it could have gone differently. That if the station master hadn't lost the letter, that if Clara hadn't been on that platform that afternoon, watching with the frank attention of a child who hasn't yet learned to look away from things that need looking at. That if Cole Brennan had been a different kind of man, the kind who looks at a woman's difficulty and sees only trouble rather than character. She was aware of the contingency of it. She did not take it for granted. What she took instead was this: the kitchen in the morning, the south light through the window, the sound of Clara's boots on the stairs coming down too fast the way she always did. Cole's coffee already made because he was up before anyone. The garden in spring, the mare and the filly in the last stall, the filly's white thumbprint mark catching the lantern light. The mountains at every season, doing their indifferent, enormous work of simply being there. She took the teaching, and the children who arrived not reading and left doing so, and the satisfaction of that which was unlike any other satisfaction she had known. She took the evenings on the porch, and the stars, and the silences that didn't need filling. She took Clara, who called her mama everywhere now, without hesitation, who had her own stubbornness and her own relentless curiosity, and who was going to be, Evelyn thought, someone remarkable. Not because she was perfect, but because she was absolutely, thoroughly herself. And she had never been taught to be otherwise. She took Cole, his hands and his patience and his capacity for staying, his inability to say the complicated things quickly, and his habit of eventually saying them right. The way he looked at her sometimes as if he was still surprised she was there, which she did not find insulting, but instead found, in the specific way of things, you do not expect to find beautiful, completely beautiful. One evening in late autumn, the second autumn, Evelyn was on the porch alone. Cole was inside reading to Clara, whose bedtime reading had recently escalated to books that required Cole to ask Evelyn what certain words meant before the session, which Clara found hilarious and he found humbling, and which had quietly become one of Evelyn's favorite things about the week. She could hear his voice through the window, low and steady, working through the sentences with the patience he brought to everything that mattered, and Clara's occasional interruptions, and the fire inside, and the filly moving in the barn. She looked at the mountains in the last light. They were doing their thing, going purple, going black, the sky behind them still holding orange at the very edge before it gave in to dark. She had watched this specific transition dozens of times from this specific porch, and it was never the same twice, which was a thing she had not known she would come to value before she had a porch to come back to. She had arrived in this place with a battered suitcase and a letter with no money in it and no plan beyond the one that had just collapsed. She was leaving nothing. She was not going anywhere. She was for the first time in her adult life precisely where she was supposed to be. Not because someone had arranged it for her, not because she had followed the expected path, but because she had kept going after the path ended and had found something better than the path in the unmarked ground beyond it. That was the whole of the lesson, she thought, if there was a lesson to be found in any of it. Keep going past the place where you expected to stop. Not blindly, not without grief for what the stopping would have meant, but keep going and pay attention to what is actually in front of you rather than to what you had been promised, and be willing to recognize the right thing even when it arrives in a form you didn't plan for. She had been the bride no one came to claim. She had stood on that platform and understood, in the clearest and most brutal way, that the life she had planned was not going to happen. And then a child with a sideways hat had looked up at her and asked if she was lost, and she had answered more honestly than she intended, and everything that followed had followed from that. She was not lost. She had not been lost, she understood now, even when she thought she was. She had been in transit, moving between the life that hadn't been hers and the one that was. The transit had been difficult and frightening, and it had asked more of her than she had known she had to give, and she had given it anyway, because she was not built to stop. Cole came out. He brought coffee, as he did. He sat on the top step, as he did. The night came in around them, as it did. "She's asleep," he said. That was fast. She fought it for 20 minutes and then went all at once. He handed her the cup. "She does that." "She does," Evelyn said. They were quiet for a while. The stars came out in their extravagant way, the way that never stopped being more than she was ready for. "Are you all right?" Cole asked. He asked it not because anything was wrong, but in the particular way of a person who checks, who makes a habit of checking, who has decided that the people in his care deserve to be asked. She looked at the mountains and the stars and the light in the barn and this man beside her on the step with his coffee and his patience and his willingness to stay. "Yes," she said, simply and completely,